Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at the American Corner for the alumni outreach hosted by the U.S. Embassy in Port Moresby. And my name is Sophie Yaruso. I was privileged enough to go on what was called the 2016 Youth and Politics Reporting Tour in 3 states in America. We started off firstly in Washington, D.C., which is the capital of the United States. So basically, what it was is that 23 journalists from developing countries around the world were part of this 2016 Youth and Politics Reporting Tour. We all met in Washington, D.C. We did go to the Foreign Press Center for our first day there to meet with some very outstanding workers of the U.S. Department of State who made all of this possible. So what the aim of the reporting tour was to observe the role of the youth in politics in the United States, for that matter. And as I couldn't have, you know, gone at a more significant time in the U.S. than during the election campaigning that was going on between the two major parties in the United States. There's the Republican, obviously there's Donald Trump, and the Democrat, which was Hillary Clinton. And journalists from various news mediums, including Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Albania, Hong Kong, and other states also converged to India. It was quite interesting to meet up with journalists from all around the world, female and male both. Some were senior editors, some had a lot of knowledge about politics, about U.S. politics for that matter. Some were just news anchors like myself, they were journalists, and some also focused in others. There was one very interesting person that I met up with, and her name was Ariona. She was a feminist, and she did everything. She pointed out everything that we would discriminate if women did it, but we would not say much if men did it. So they were quite interesting characters on this tour that I went on. So basically, the Foreign Press Center has led the way in arranging. They arranged on the record interviews and engagement with youth activists from very diverse backgrounds, and it was very interesting to see how views of political stance in the U.S. varied from certain youth in different states. And so what was interesting to me was that youth would get up and get out there and stand in the streets and pass out voter registration forms or try to, lobby for either the Democrat or the Republican in the streets of Washington, D.C. So that was something that was new to me. Obviously, here in PNG, we see campaigning. Only we go to certain places campaigning, but we don't get out, we don't see the youth get out there, youth that really believe in certain policies of a candidate, that get out there, stand on the streets on their own and speak for one cause that they truly believe in. So that was something that was really eye-opening for me while in Washington, D.C. So what was more interesting was that even the U.S. public at large are giving their votes to the candidate which they least dislike. And that for me was quite interesting. And that's what makes this November's election very interesting for the U.S. Republican. I mean, having Donald Trump, a reality, TV host, and, a millionaire, come out and try to be, no one would ever take him that seriously. We would only see him in, The Apprentice, his reality TV show. However, he's come from being that reality show character to being this close to being the U.S. president, which for me is quite fascinating, because I keep asking myself, how on earth did this guy make it this far? The millennials, that's one input. And to be honest, there was the first time I heard of the word millennials. The millennials are referred to a group of young voters, a group of young people in the U.S. It's actually, and they range from the ages of about 18 when you're eligible to vote to 35. And so the millennials, which could simply describe as a youth movement, are standing up and challenging the current status quo. So basically, when I say challenging the status quo, is that they have become somewhat disillusionized and they're disengaged with what's happening with the current political situation, or with the current status of the US for that matter. So social media, however, has still yet to find its place in politics, on the political scene. And I think in PNG we would, relate more because we've just passed a cybercrime bill, and that's basically because people are getting out there on social media, what we know here as keyboard warriors, getting out on social media, defaming people, lashing out at certain, members of parliament or people in prominent, places in their workplace, trying to, we don't know if they defame them, tarnish their records. So therefore, the cyber bill has come into place. But however, social media, one particular organization that we were privileged enough to come into contact with was called Brigade Media, and her name was the director of Brigade Media was Jessica Dahl, and this was Impact Partnerships, and this is basically Brigade Media is basically a social network where you get, it's a networking tool for voters in the United States. And the young group of voters in the United States are known as the millennials, as I said earlier, while social media targets them. The aim of Brigade Media is to create that platform so that the youth of the United States can have, a leverage to voicing their opinions and creating that environment and those policies and speaking their mind for what they want in the future to come. Another highlight for me while being in Washington was obviously visiting the American University. The American University is something else. It plays a very vital role in the U.S. elections because they are there. They do live crosses. They also set the pace for how the elections are. The elections are kind of echoed out through the rest of the United States. And one thing that was very, very that really stood out for me was they have a specialized public affairs school, and that's like a department. It's a school of its own within the American University. And to come to think of all the public affairs work that they do at the U.S. Embassy and at the Australian High Commission, I, for one, worked in a public affairs section at the U.S. Embassy, and therefore I appreciated the fact that to have a school specialized in the public affairs area was something that really stood out for me at the American University. We took a 2-hour bus ride to Charlottesville, Virginia. And so that was the second state we visited. This state, it was quite interesting. I thought of it as a one-way state because we were on the same street the whole time, and we visited the University of Virginia, which is huge. And for a university like University of Virginia, to see what it offered, it was really amazing. It had the biggest cafeteria that I've ever seen. I keep telling all my other friends that the cafeteria of the University of Virginia is just as big as the food court at Vision City. And you know what? For just $11, I think it was, $11 or $9, you could get to eat almost everything from every stall that was there, and it was all up to you. Drink anything and eat anything. And I think that's one thing that the US and the students at the US don't really get to see, how privileged they are compared to the amount of money we pay here to go to UPNG and to Divine Word, and especially a state school like UPNG, where things are, resources are scarce, technology is not at the top of its game, it's really at the bottom. We have the private tertiary institutions that are doing way better than the University of Papua New Guinea, which has proudly produced up to 5 prime ministers of this country, and we still lack the resources and all of that thing. So the youth movement really appealed to me in that the millennials are somewhat you could almost try to say that they were like they kind of reflected, not necessarily in the sense of an unrest, but the UPNG unrest was an example of how the youth and how the millennials are not happy with the current political status. They're not happy with how the country is being run, certain decisions that are made by the prime minister and politicians. These also reflect the millennial stand back in the U.S. Visiting the Cavalier Daily and speaking to the editor, interviewing her was one that stood out for me. So there was like the main idea of going to the University of Virginia was to see how they run their own organizations, especially in news gathering. One question that I did ask to the editor of Cavalier Daily was that if she thought it was important for journalists to be the only ones gathering news at a media organization, or was it important to have output from other people like experts. For example, there could be a weather report. A journalist could go out and get a weather report. However, you would need a specialist in that area also to give you, a report that would really outline the specifics of what's happening weather-wise. And so I think that's also broadened my perspective of seeing reporting and news hunting and news gathering as only for journalists. I think there are other people who are very creative in writing that bring a whole lot more to the game. A whole lot more creativity to the art of journalism. So, there is a drop in the standard of journalism, but then there is also what other people come in and contribute to journalism that makes it so interesting in the media industry these days. So we took the third and the final state we visited was Denver, Colorado, and you got to appreciate this state. It's really at the top of its game in terms of the elections. It's very transparent. It's won a couple of awards for being transparent and for being effective, for having voting through the mailbox, the mail voting system. And it's been really transparent right throughout, and it's actually got the highest number of registered voters in the U.S. At the moment. It stands out. So I think that was partly the reason why the organizers of this tour chose that state, and you really got to appreciate it for them taking you to a place where you get to really understand the electoral process of the United States. And immediately, anyone who knows Denver that well would come to know Denver Broncos. So that's the NFL, it's the National Football League. That's their national team. And everything that happens, the elections are also run. They try to be, because Denver Broncos are the champions of the NFL currently in the U.S. There's an example that was given by the Denver election office, and they said that they try to live by what the Denver Broncos team does, and that's to, strive and be the best at everything they do and reach for higher achievements. And that was an interesting contrast to see that the elections use a sporting team as their example to do so much better, like in their process as a whole to achieve the greater good. That for me, like as a sports reporter as well back here in Papua New Guinea, that for me was a real standout. So the Aurora campus plays host to 3 tertiary institutions. You have the Denver Community College, you have the Metro University, and then you have what's called the Colorado State University. So we visited the Aurora campus on a day where it was the National Voter Registration Day. And so students were out in numbers celebrating that day, also carrying out awareness on how important it is for everyone to vote, to register their votes as soon as they come of age, and to get that vote counted for a better future for you, or to choose that leader whom will represent you the best and represent your views and your ideas the most. And what's also interesting to see was just yesterday, which was just this week rather, NCD schools, they launched what's called the schools voters registration, and that's for students in NCD to be able to register themselves once they reach the age of 18. So I thought that was very interesting to compare what was happening in an Aurora campus in Colorado at the time when I was there, to the NCD schools voter registration that just happened this week here in the nation's capitals. Oh, and they say you gotta save the best for the last. One visit that I'd come away with this, and I will remember this, for as long as I can, is that our visit while in Denver, Colorado, we paid a visit to the U.S. Academy, U.S. Air Force Academy, in Colorado Springs, in the mountains of Colorado. It was beautiful. It was just mind blowing. But what was special about this was going to the U.S. Air Force Academy was that in 2000 and I think it was 2014, the U.S. Air Force were here for 2 months here in Papua New Guinea. They were up in Mount Hagen. They had built female dormitories and did maintenance to classrooms at the Togoba Secondary School, which is located, which is in Mount Hagen. And so as part of their outreach and as part of, it was a Pacific Unity project, program. And while I worked at the U.S. Embassy, I went to Mount Hagen I worked closely with the U.S. Air Force that was based here for 2 months in Mount Hagen, to get the outreach going, to let the locals know what they were doing there and how they blended in with the locals and giving back to the community for that matter. So it was something special for me to personally go to where they actually learn how to do all those things. So one thing that stood out for me was, you wouldn't believe it, is that the cadets, they basically line up like a parade. They do a parade just to go to lunch at the mess, and that was one thing that we stood for hours. And the general public, they go out to Colorado Springs just to stand there and watch the cadets all line up and march in amazing order just to get to the mess. And so that basically wraps up my entire visit to the United States as part of 23 foreign journalists on the 2016 Youth and Politics reporting tour of Washington, D.C. And, I, I would say, I said it once and I'll say it again, if there's an experience that money can buy, you come away with the experience that you take. And that's something that's going to be with you for a lifetime, and you'll continue to share it and compare it and contrast it, and you'd understand why certain things happened there back then that you would understand why they happened going forward. And that's why I appreciate this very much. And I'm thankful to the U.S. Embassy and all these wonderful programs that it's been sending the PNG journalists on. That's about it from me. So thank you for listening.